The farmhouse in which my grandparents lived found its source of water to be 3 cisterns that were fed by the water that ran off of the roof of the farmhouse and some nearby sheds. Deep, square, concrete pits filled up throughout the spring and the summer rains, and there was the water that we used to drink and to wash and to cook in one of those 3 cisterns. When we would get to the end of August or the beginning of September, this sort of time of year, frequently the water had been sitting in those cisterns for some time, and the members of my generation would complain bitterly that the water tasted bad. It had been stagnant for some time, sitting there, not moving. And so we would seldom try to get a drink at Grandma's house. We'd carry our thirst with us, maybe hoping that we'd go home soon, where I could get a drink and the water tasted better. But whenever we complained, my grandfather was quick to step in and to correct us. He would make certain that we understood very clearly that we were fortunate to have clean water at all. And he would remind us that we were the stewards, the caretaker of those deep pools of water that were held in reserve to satisfy a thirsty family. The water sometimes tasted bad because it was still. It wasn't moving. It wasn't churned up or oxygenated. This congregation bears the name of Living Waters. But truth be told, Living Waters never was and never will be the source of water. Living Waters will only be a place where water pools up and where it is to be drawn to quench the thirst of a community. We live in community. We live in the community of this congregation. We live in the community of a family or of a neighborhood. And what Jesus does in today's gospel story is he talks about what it's like when that family suffers some kind of stress, some sort of conflict, something that is going to divide us, separate us, create a wall between us and our neighbor, our friend, our brother, our sister. This is the first time we're reading a lesson from the 18th chapter of Matthew this year. And what Matthew has done in this particular gospel is he has pushed together a whole bunch of stories about sin and about separation and about how God intends us to deal with that. He starts off talking about what it's like when someone causes a child to sin. When someone creates an event or a circumstance, when a child is suddenly separated from the righteousness into which we've been called, when there's a wall that's built up, it would be better, says Jesus, for that person to have a millstone tied around their neck and to be thrown into the sea than for that kind of sin to continue to be perpetrated. But what do we do about that? He tells us then another story about one sheep that is lost, 1 out of 100, 1%. And the loving shepherd so troubled and distraught by the one that has been separated from the flock. And he will turn away from that flock for a brief period of time, and he will go and he will hunt down that one so that it might return to the flock, so that it might once again be part of that sheep community. That's the intention of God. As the stories go on in the 18th chapter of Matthew. Sin separates, sin builds walls, and it is God's intention to bring reconciliation and restoration and life back to the very one who has suffered because of the conflict, because of the sin, because of the ill will. And so we read, beginning at verse 15, the story of how God coaches us to deal with conflict when it comes and rests within our own community, within our own fellowship. First of all, go one-on-one in a quiet place away from everyone else and try to bring some reconciliation. We're reminded almost of the Truth and Reconciliation Councils that Bishop Tutu had established and used so effectively in South Africa. Tell the truth, be reconciled. If that doesn't work, broaden that out in the presence of one or two witnesses. If that doesn't work, broaden it out so that the entire community might work towards restoration and reconciliation, that the walls that separate us would be torn down and destroyed so that we can welcome one another back in open arms. Yes, this is not about judgment. This text is not about throwing folks out of the church. This is about reconciliation. And never give up. Because even if we fail at these 3 prescribed steps, then Jesus says, if that doesn't work, then treat this one. Treat this one who has been separated from the community as if they were a Gentile or a tax collector. And we have just gotten done reading a whole bunch of stories about the work of Jesus in Gentile territory. Jesus went into those Gentile territories not to bring condemnation, not to build a wall to protect us on this side and to hold away those on the other side, but again and again, among the Canaanites, among the people of Tyre and Sidon, the people who lived in the Gentile world, they were the focus of the missionary work of Jesus and his disciples. Jesus would have us know in this text that we read today that the Spirit of Jesus Christ will be a part of every inevitable conflict if we're going to bring it to resolution. That's not always good news to people. Some folks would prefer if Jesus would not be involved in the conversation at all. The promise of Jesus being with us where 2 or 3 are gathered, in the process of reconciliation and forgiveness. The promise of Jesus is only good news if we are comfortable with Jesus being close. About a year ago, through the adult education program at Warren County Community College, I signed up for golf lessons. I don't play golf, but I thought maybe it was time in my retirement that I learn how to play golf, and so with some borrowed clubs from my son-in-law, I trotted off to the community college to take golf lessons. Oh, there were about a dozen of us in that class, and I gotta tell you, I would get rattled when the instructor would stand right by me, watching every move, my grip, my feet, my hips, every little thing that I did. Couldn't she go someplace else? Wasn't there someone at the other end of the line who might better qualify for her attention? I didn't like when she stood so close. But I also knew that if I was going to improve my skill set, I very much needed her to be there. And so it is with our God. Jesus is oftentimes called Emmanuel. It's a church word. It means God with us. I guess for all of us and for every community, there are moments when we sort of wish that Jesus weren't standing quite so close. Couldn't God be paying closer attention to someone or some other community? But out of God's love, God has promised to be Emmanuel, to be with us. God stays close. And so when those things enter our life, when those things flavor our relationships in such a way so that we feel weakened or separated or isolated, we can find comfort in knowing that God will stay close. You know that we've been praying for the Albrecht family as their newborn child is suffering some significant medical issues. When something like that happens, we feel as if our world has come crashing down. We feel isolated, separated. But God will have none of it. Because God is Emmanuel. Because God stays with us, stays close, and by so doing, brings along the hope of reconciliation, the hope of a new beginning, the promise of something new coming and emerging out of that. A God who will step aside from the 99 to seek and track down that one. Will gather that one up in his arms and assure them that they are close. Remember the old movie City Slickers? Starring Billy Crystal. The City Slickers out on the cattle drive. There's a moment in there where Phil, one of the characters, he's Billy Crystal's buddy. Phil pokes his head into the tent one night and he's upset. His marriage has fallen apart. His life has sort of come to naught. He's despondent. Then he speaks to Billy Crystal, and Billy Crystal says, "Hey, you remember when we were kids and we'd be playing ball and we'd hit the ball up into the tree or some other kind of interference, and when that would happen, we would all just shout out, 'Do-over!' Billy Crystal says to his friend Phil, your life is a do-over. A do-over gives us that opportunity to break down the walls, to build bridges over that which separates, to bring restoration and reconciliation. Jesus promises to us that when he is close, when 2 or 3 are gathered, when we are working and telling the truth and bringing forgiveness, we are enmeshed in the process of a do-over, a new life that starts yet again. The living waters of baptism are that pool of water out of which we draw new life. It's that pool of water that washes over us, that refreshes us, that gives us life, that allows us to claim that our life will be a do-over because God has brought reconciliation. God will assure us we'll never be separated from God's love. There will always be that chance. There will always be that opportunity. There will always be that hope that God will bring us to restoration, that the community will be restored and well and strong in its witness. We gather outdoors on a Sunday morning. Usually the first thing that people do when they get out of their cars is they look at the addition to the building, try to identify from some distance what they perceive has happened in the past week. Did the shingles go on? Were the windows installed? Has the door finally been set in place? I get out of my car today and saw the sidewalks had been poured. There's been a number of times in the past weeks, people sort of smile, joke. They look at the addition and they say, if you build it, they will come. Well, folks, I hate to be too picky, but you're misquoting the movie. In the movie The Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, the voice that comes and speaks to him, the voice says, if you build it, he will come. There's no they. It's he. He has come and remains with us. Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, has come among us and brings with him the power to tear down and to cross boundaries. In the movie Field of Dreams, Ray, at the end of the movie, has an opportunity to stand face to face and to talk to his father. And in the simple act of playing catch, there's a restored relationship that is celebrated. And so it is for us. Living Waters is working hard to build it. And I don't just mean an addition. Working hard to build a community. Working hard to build relationships. Working hard to tear down the boundaries of discrimination, of racism, to tear down the boundaries and restore the relationships that have been broken by sin and by distance and by time and by every sort of obstacle. If we build it, he will come. And the promise of Jesus is that where 2 or 3 are gathered, he will come. He will be in the midst of us for the purposes of new life and restoration.